Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. This is a special episode of Casual Friday. I wanted to do a year-end video to wrap up the year 2025. I was looking through my Ravelry notebook last week and looking at all of the things that I knit during the year. I tag my projects with things like what year that it was knit in, whether or not I designed it, and what type of item it is. Like, is it socks? Is it a hat? Is it something for a neck? Is it a blanket? That kind of thing. And so that I can look in my Ravelry notebook and look for that particular category or look for that particular year and see what I made at that time. Or I can just search my entire notebook for something and then look to see what year I knitted in. So I just really like the Ravelry notebook. I use it extensively for tracking my projects. And what I noticed was that there were quite a few projects that I hadn't taken pictures of. And there was even one project where not only did I not have a picture, I could not figure out it was for a pair of socks, and I could not visualize that pair of socks. I looked at the yarn brand and the description of kind of what the color was. I had no memory of it. So I spent that morning, afternoon, whatever it was, digging up all of the projects that I hadn't taken photographs of, or maybe I had kind of a bad photograph or one that was just in progress, and made sure to update that. And what I saw was that I had more or less 25 projects that I did in 2025. And I say more or less because I never end the year with every project finished and then start the year with a clean slate. There are always projects that maybe I start in December and I finish in January, or there are projects that I knit mostly or completely during the year, and then I realize it doesn't fit right, or there's something about it that I need to change, and I just can't rip it out at that moment after I've just finished the sweater. And so I put it to the side until February. When I do finish it February, sometimes it's fix it February, and then I'll bring those projects out. So it's 25 projects, more or less, depending on how you count them. But what I wanted to do was go through those projects and briefly talk about them and say what it was that I got out of that project, because one of my goals in knitting is to always be learning. So I don't learn something new with every single project. If I knit a pair of socks for myself, for example, a plain vanilla pair of socks, I am choosing what heel, what toe. I'm deciding how I want to work the heel based on the color pattern. I'm making decisions like that, but I know how to make socks. And so that's not learning something new. And I do like having some mindless projects throughout the year, whether it's for working on at knitting groups or when I'm traveling. So not every project is an opportunity for me to learn something new, but many of them are. So I want to go through the projects, starting with what I finished first, and tell you a little bit about each of those. I started last year by finishing a couple of projects before Finish It February, because these were things that I thought I could get done in a couple of days. I was between projects at the time, or I had projects on hold, and I thought it was a good time to finish those off. So the first thing that I finished was this stocking, and it's just one stocking. I'm doing this long-term project where I'm trying to understand how socks and stockings evolved, particularly knitted ones, but also looking at what came before knitted stockings. And so I'm knitting things from different centuries. And this is a stocking from 1655. It was knit using the very first stocking pattern published in English. and it was from a book called Natura. I'll put it on the screen. I can never remember. There's a Latin phrase which means nature unboweled. Basically, this is a book of all of nature's secrets, like how to cook certain things, how to make certain medicines or ointments and things like that. And it was meant to be like a reference book for the woman of the house. And so they had this one pattern for knitting a hose. Now I used a pattern from Piecework magazine where she had gone through and kind of translated the pattern into more modern terminology and to make it clearer, because as the first stocking pattern ever written in English, it was not up to the standards that we expect today. It was a really interesting construction, had elements that I've seen in other stockings, but they were variations of those from this time period. So that was the first thing. I had started this in, I think, April of 2024 and then put it to the side because, frankly, it was kind of boring. There's a very long section of stockinette and I had just gotten bored. And so when I picked it up again, I was able to finish it and do the interesting parts there. The second project I finished was one I just started in early December in terms of the knitting. So this is a pair of socks. I call them my Peacock socks because that is the color of the dye. This is my first project where I started from the raw fleece, from the wool. I bought a fleece at a fiber festival. I scoured the fleece, I processed it by carding it on my drum carder, I spun it, and then I dyed the yarn, and then I designed a sock and knit it. So that's these socks right here. They're dark, it's hard to see. There's a pretty subtle stitch pattern. It's a stitch pattern I got from the book Sequence Knitting, which allows you to just keep repeating this same sequence over and over and over again. So it's going in a spiral until you get to the point where you're done knitting. My third project of the year is one that I physically don't have because it didn't belong to me. This was a shawl pattern called Wingspan, and I'll put a picture on the screen, that I got through a program, an organization called the Loose Ends Project. So what they do is they help grieving families finish the crafting projects that their deceased family member left behind. And they're not always people who have died. Sometimes it's people who are too ill in some way to continue doing the project. I had signed up a year and a half before, and I was matched up. They try to match you up with somebody who can do the craft, has the skill level required for that craft, and is in close proximity to that person. And this ended up being a woman who lives just 2 blocks from me, and she has an illness, that terminal illness, and was no longer able to, kind of keep track of this really complicated pattern. And it was complicated. It's probably one of the more complicated things I've knit in terms of following a pattern and then trying to find my way into it. As I was knitting along, I could see that there was not going to be enough of this yarn to complete the shawl. And it was a special gradient indie dyed yarn that was done in collaboration with the pattern writer. And so I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I talked to the woman who I was knitting for about what she wanted. Did she want me to make a shorter version of this shawl and just use the yarn I had? Or did she want me to complete it as it was written to the size that it was written? And she wanted the size it was supposed to be. I was able to talk to people I knew about how I could dye some more of this yarn or get it dyed. And there was somebody in the private Facebook group that's for loose ends finishers, people who actually have projects to finish, who knew the dyer and messaged her. She dyed up the quantity of yarn that I needed to finish the shawl. So there was a pause for about 6 or 8 weeks over the holidays, and then she just has, her schedule of when she's doing dyeing. So I started this in December and then put it on pause right before Christmas, and then toward the end of February, I was able to complete it and walk it over to my neighbor and give it to her. And she was so pleased to get it. And I found that to be a really rewarding project. It isn't something I ever would have chosen to knit for myself. It was beautiful. It's just not something I would have chosen for myself. I loved having the opportunity not only to knit that project, but have it go to the person who really wanted to have something beautiful for herself. She does most of her knitting for other people. It was the one thing she wanted to knit for herself that was really beautiful, and she just couldn't do it. And I was delighted to be able to help her with that. This next project was one that I saw in my Ravelry notebook. There was no photo. There were some notes in there, and there was like what yarn I used, and I just could not figure out what these socks were. And so I looked, I have a bin in my desk for where I can keep works in progress. So I can get them off my desk if I need to use my desk for something else, but it's right in my desk. And so I can just pull it out and you know, put the work in progress in there or take it out. And I thought, well, maybe somehow they're still in there. And I dug around, and at the very bottom, I found a pair of socks, and I saw them, and I thought, I have no memory of these socks. These are the socks right here. What I had failed to do was to weave in the ends on this pair of socks, and I couldn't figure out why I had just kind of abandoned them. And I tried one of them on, and then the memory of them came back. You cannot see this. I'll try to put a close-up photo on the screen, but because of the stitch pattern, it's really hard to tell. You can see how the toe is kind of pointy. I did a type of decrease. I think I'd found it in maybe an antique book somewhere. It's called a spiral toe. And so the decreases spiral around, and somehow that really ends up making it a very narrow toe. I wouldn't knit this one again, and I'm not going to rip them out and re-knit them. I think it would need more yarn, and I don't know where the leftover yarn is. I might be able to find it, but I'll try wearing them and see what I think, and then if they're just unwearable, then I'll see if I can either find the yarn or I'll just rip out the toes and knit with a contrast if I can. But these were a total surprise. The next two projects were projects that I worked on in February. Those sock projects, I called them my Finish It February socks. It was just something easy and mindless to do at knitting groups because the two projects I was working on for Finish It February were not things, for the most part, that I could take to knitting groups and just work on them and know what I was doing. So the first one was this Danish Night sweater. It's from a book called Traditional Danish Sweaters. It's got historical information. It's got a reference section for how you can design your own, and there's stitch patterns. And then there are actual patterns in the back of the book that come in one size, because these are students of the book's author who had created these sweaters for themselves in a class, and then she really thought they turned out great, and she put them in the book. So this is one where I had wanted to knit for several years. It's got, I don't even know if you can see on the screen, there are these 8 pointed stars, and they're all different going up the middle. It has a hem that is a split hem, and it's got a square neckline that is knit while you're knitting the sweater, and then it has sleeves that have a different stitch pattern in them. I had bought some yak, 100% yak fingering weight wool at our local Yarn Over marketplace that our guild puts on every year. And I bought 3 skeins of it. And then I got home and I thought, I don't know if it's enough. And I looked in the book, I thought that's going to be really cutting it close. So I contacted the dyer and said, do you have another skein of this colorway? And he said, yes. And he shipped it to me. And then 9 months later, when I finally decided to start the sweater, I just took a skein out, wound it up, and started the sweater. So I knit both sleeves and one of the 2 bottom bands with that first skein. Then I pulled out another skein, did the second bottom band, then I joined them in the round, and I was an inch or 2 up when I realized the front and the back bands didn't match. One was a darker color. And at that point, I didn't know if the sleeves in the first band were the color that I had 3 skeins of, or if it was the lighter color. And so I took all the colors out and I realized that, and then the other option was they were all different because they were an indie dyer. And then I didn't know what I was going to do. And so what I realized is they were all lighter, but I still didn't know if I had enough to make the entire thing out of 3 skeins. So I finished the body and I saw that I wouldn't have had enough to knit the entire sweater with only 3 skeins. So I did have to use that 4th darker skein, and I spent some time trying to figure it out. So I knit the sweater in end of July to end of August. And then I said, I'm going to put this to the side until February, and I need to kind of figure out what I want to do. And what I decided to do was rip out the sleeves, which had been in dark, but leave the cuffs, and rip out, cut off the bottom, preserve 1 dark band, and then rip out the light one. I re-knit the bottom band in the dark color, and then joined them in the round, and then worked a few rounds in the stitch pattern, and I grafted the body back together. So the body would have the 2 dark bands, and then I re-knit the sleeves with the lighter color, but keeping the dark bands. So I was able to use all of the light color, or most of it, and then have the dark band. So you can see that dark band below on the front and the back. So this was something that didn't defeat me. It just was like, I know I have the skills to do this. I'm a master hand knitter. I have a lot of skills. I know a lot of ways of doing things. Doesn't keep me from making mistakes, but it helps me be able to know how to fix things and have multiple options and think about which way I'm going to do this. I was able to fix it, no problem, but I didn't want to do it right after I'd finished it the first time. So I waited till February. The second thing I worked on in Finish It February was a sweater that I started at the end of April and finished in early June. This is the first sweater I had knit using my own hand spun yarn. So this is a sweater that I spun all the yarn. I dyed this gradient. There's actually 5 colors. It kind of looks like there's just 3, but there are 5 colors. So I dyed the gradient, designed the sweater, and I knit it, and it was just too roomy in the shoulders. I did not like the way it fit in the shoulders. And this was a top-down sweater using simultaneous set-in sleeves. So you start with the shoulders, and then you pick up along the sides of the shoulders to create the beginning of the sleeve caps, and then you're working back and forth just like you would for a raglan, where you have your increases for your sleeves and for your body and that sort of thing. And that was, I wanted to do that in order to get the stripes at the top of the sleeve cap to match on the body. And because it was knit top down, I was going to need to re-knit from the top down. So I still had some yarn left, so I restarted it in the dimensions that I wanted and knit all the way down to the armholes. I had to then take apart this sweater, so I had to take out the button bands, take out the collar, cut off the top of the sleeves and the bodice, and then graft the new knitting to that. Again, I have the skills to do that, but it was something that I needed to think about and give myself time before I would do that. And the size was much better. I will say that because it's top down, and I picked up stitches along the cast on edge, which you'd hope would give it enough stability. I think it's still too stretchy, and so this February I'm going to use some slip stitch crochet along the seam line to keep those shoulders from stretching wide. So there's still work to be done on this sweater, but I do really like it, and I am really proud of it. So this project I redid in March. I didn't make it in finish it February, but I started working on it in March. And I wanted to wait a little bit because I wanted to start another new sweater project at the same time that I was restarting my handspun sweater project. The sweater that I wanted to start at the same time is this one. It's called Lenu. I wanted to start them both at the same time because they're both top-down set-in sleeve sweaters, but they have different construction methods. The gradient sweater with the handspun is done with what's called simultaneous set-in sleeves. And the Lenu uses what is called contiguous construction. And I wanted to start them at the same time so that I could demonstrate in a video, I think it was Casual Friday videos, where I was showing how the beginnings of them were different, how the construction methods work. I could link down to that video down below in the show notes if you're interested in understanding the difference between those two types of set-in sleeve constructions. I love this sweater though, love the color, fits really well. So I think at some point I'll probably do another contiguous construction, but I was really happy to learn that construction and really understand how it works. The next project is one that I know is in the house because I was using it the other day because my neck was cold, and it's not a project I ever thought I would have normally have been interested in. It is a little kerchief pattern, and the reason I knit it was because we have this monthly brew and make with you group that meets at different breweries around the Twin Cities. And it's kind of hosted by a woman named Emily, who's known as the Botanical Knitter on YouTube and Instagram. She thought it would be fun for our local fiber festival, which is Shepherd's Harvest. It's on the Mother's Day weekend every year in May. It would be fun to do a little project as a knit along, and then we could have a meetup on the Saturday of Shepherd's Harvest. And we could all do show and tell with our little kerchiefs. The idea was that some years it's really cold during Mother's Day weekend, and some weekends it's really hot. And so a little kerchief could work regardless of what the weather was. And it turned out that my daughter and her fiance flew into Minneapolis right before that weekend. And so I didn't want to spend Saturday and Sunday at Shepherd's Harvest and missed time with them. They came to Shepherd's Harvest with me on Sunday, but I missed the meetup. It's a little kerchief that's been here in my office, and then the other day I was cold and I had it around my neck and I took it off somewhere. I don't know where it is, but you can see it on the screen here. The next item is also a little scarf shawlette type of thing. This makes 3 in 1 year, and I almost never knit anything like this. I mean, once in a while I'll knit a shawl or a shawlette or a scallop, but very rarely, and this is the 3rd one. But one was for loose ends, one was for this knit along meetup that I didn't go to, and this one was because I found this yarn in the yarn shop in Menominee, Wisconsin, when our guild was having its retreat, and I was so intrigued by the yarn and how would it be used, and learned that weekend about yarn that is dyed for what's called assigned pooling, so that anytime you get to this span of dyed contrast color, you do a special little stitch that uses up all of that yarn in that one spot, and then you continue on. And so it becomes a really random spreading of something, particularly in an item that gets bigger and bigger or smaller and smaller as you're knitting it. This was a really fun project. I just had so much fun knitting it, really enjoyed it, and kept thinking I want to do more assigned pooling, and I haven't come back to it. So maybe someday, but there was something that I just really enjoyed learning about and being able to work with. The next project is one that, again, I don't have. This was a pair of socks. When my daughter and her fiance flew in, they flew into Minneapolis and then wanted to drive with us down to Santa Fe for my mother-in-law's 90th birthday. Part of the reason is that Sam is from Blackpool, England. It's fascinating to him to be able to drive the vast distances that we have here in the US and see the different landscapes. So I started a pair of socks for him in the car on the trip, and then finished them up when we were in Santa Fe so that he would have them before we went back to Minneapolis and they flew back to the Netherlands. So these are socks for Sam that I'm showing you on the screen. The next project is also one that I do not have physically, but I do have photos of. So our guild does service knitting. We have service partners every year that we do service knitting for. And we had this challenge to do, I think, 100 pairs of mittens or something like that. So I did a pair of mittens. It's a free pattern from Pearl Soho called Arched gusset, I think it's called. And it's a very unusual. The increases are all along the palm side, along the gusset. So you're increasing every round instead of 2 increases every other on both sides of the hand. And it looks very odd. It fits amazing. I had yarn left over, so I knit a little hat, and then those were both donated to the Guild for surface knitting. The next project I knit is the one that I'm wearing, and it's one of the ones that I'm most happy with. I get a lot of use out of. It's dark, so it's kind of hard to see the stitch patterning. But this is yarn that I got from Get Bentz Farm. I did a Year with the Sheep program where you're visiting the farm every month or so in the summer, and then you get to, during fall shearing, you get to pick a fleece, and then you can choose if you want Teresa, she has a mini mill, if you want her to process it, turn it into yarn, turn it into roving that you can spin, like whatever you want to do. And if you want to, you can come to the mill when your fleece is going to get processed and help with that. And that was what I wanted to. I have plenty of wool that I can spin, but I don't have the opportunity to actually help work the machinery and watch my fleece get turned into yarn. And so I chose this black fleece. It's the blackest fleece I've ever seen. It's actually very, very, very dark brown, but it's considered black. I got to run the carding machine, and so that all the fleeces that we were processing that day from the white ones, and then the light gray, and then the darker gray, and then the black, and then mine was the very last one. And then she spun it up into yarn a day or so later. Then I had this yarn and I needed to turn it into a sweater. I wanted to knit a sweater that had a zipper in it because I'd never done that before. I put in a short zipper in something, but I hadn't put a long zipper in. I designed the sweater. I designed it so that I have this collar that would flip back like this if I didn't have it zipped up all the way. I learned how to do this zipper facing that really hides the zipper. It's just a beautiful technique. So I learned quite a few things from doing that. So this is one of my favorite projects for the year. Then I knit another pair of socks for myself. I have quite a few pairs of socks that are getting thin in the soles, and I just don't have the desire or will to darn them. And so I've been making myself a few more pairs. And this is one pair. It's just got I think a modified Dutch heel. I can leave links down below to that process. And then what's called a long round toe, which I also have videos for. During July, I spent a lot of what would normally be my knitting time, and it's kind of hot. It's a Tour de Fleece, which is when spinners set challenges for themselves and spin in the time that the Tour de France bicycle race is going on. So I was doing a lot of spinning to spin enough yarn for another sweater, and I was thinking about some videos that I wanted to do this fall on how to knit a top-down hat without a pattern. I was experimenting with how to do the different ways of doing the crown and what would be the easiest way to teach that if I was doing, you know, a single video on it. So I knit a little hat as an experiment, and then I knit this Knit One Purl One ribbing hat to kind of figure out how I wanted to do increases that maintained the stitch pattern. Those were things that I did in July. I did finish spinning the wool that I had. One of my viewers had sent me as a gift 7 2-ounce balls of roving that a friend of hers had created in a mill that she works at. I think they were from her sheep, and then she dyed the wool and then turned it into roving. It was going to be really limited on the yardage, and so I had to find a pattern where I could use this yarn weight and then make sure that I had enough of it to make a whole sweater. So I thought, well, this got to be top down, and I was talking to people, and a lot of people mentioned Ridonculous, which I hate the way it looks on their main pattern page. It's just this enormous, huge thing on this little waif. So I started looking into it and saw, oh, people, you can knit it in a wide variety of yarn weights, and then I'm like, I don't like the oversized body and the relatively snug arms, and so I figured out how to divide up the body and the sleeves so that I could get a fit that I liked better. So I did that, and then I also added some of the stitch pattern that you see at the yoke. I added at the bottom of the body and the sleeves, And I did do, I think it was a Casual Friday episode on how I modified the Ridonculous pattern in order to get the proportions that I wanted for the sweater, because the whole oversized thing, I did that in the 80s. Don't want to do it again. So in the summertime, I asked my brother if he could make me a tool that I could use in my spinning. It's a way to create a plying bracelet that allows you to ply from both ends of the same spun yarn. So you have your singles and then you can ply from the same end. So there's this method of doing a plying bracelet where you're winding the yarn on your hand in a special way, and then you can wind it off. But if I was spinning a sample that was more than an ounce, it got to be too much on my hand, and I found out there was a tool for that. The tool is called a Handy Andy. And so I asked my brother, sent my brother pictures, can you make this for me? He said yes. And he was getting ready to retire, and he was going to have more time to do his woodworking. So he said yes. So I thought, well, I'll better do something in exchange. And so I started knitting him a pair of socks. So I knit one sock in like July to do at knitting groups while I was spinning for Tour de Fleece at home. So in August, I decided to plan a 1-week trip, and it's going to be like a fiber journey. So it's going to drive to Wisconsin, stay overnight, and then go to Wisconsin Sheep and Wool the next day and take a class, a drum carding class with Clemis and Clemis. And then I would drive to Milwaukee, stay overnight, and then take the fast ferry across to Muskegon. And then I would stop and see my friend Trish from Fiber Love Diary. She does a YouTube channel as well, and she's an amazing dyer and spinner and all of that. Then I would drive to the Lansing area where my brother lives and spend a few days with him. And then on the way home, I would drive through Chicago, see my daughter, and then drive home. So I had this all planned out. And so when I was making my plans in August, I realized I better finish these socks for my brother because he was going to be retiring. And he's like, do you want to help, make the Handy Andy in my workshop? I said, yes. So we made that in his workshop. He did most of the carving out, and then I was doing the spraying, polyurethane stuff on it. It was really fun. But the socks I knit for him, I did finish them, and you can see them on the screen here. This sweater is one I started in September. I started it, I think, on this road trip. And then I continued to work on it through September and October when we also traveled to the Netherlands to see my daughter. So this is Ravelston DK. Now the pattern is for stockinette, which I did not want because that was going to bore me to death. What intrigued me about this sweater was that it had asymmetrical shaping. So the shaping that you have for the front is not the same as it is for the back, so that it's meant to fit contours better. And then the sleeve cap shaping, it's a set-in sleeve sweater. The sleeve cap is asymmetrical as well. The shaping in the front is different from the shaping in the back. And that was really interesting to me, but I wanted, all of the middle parts to be more interesting. So I chose a lace pattern from one of the, probably Barbara Walker, maybe, or I don't even know. It's probably in my Ravelry notebook. But I thought this was really interesting. The only thing that ended up disappointing me about this sweater, it fits great up here, is that I did my swatch in stockinette, and I have never known lace gauge to be different than stockinette, but this pattern was, and the shaping was done in very specific rows. And I realized it's a couple inches shorter than I would really like. I'm a little long-waisted, and so and then the hip shaping then is hitting up too high. I still really like the sweater, and I do plan on using this construction again, but I will absolutely be more careful about my row gauge in the future when I'm not using stockinette and I did my gauge in stockinette. I've been knitting for 40 years, and this is the first time I've had this kind of issue. I never stop learning. So I did work on the Ravelston sweater on my trip, but only if we were in our apartment or someplace where I could really concentrate and I could look at my chart and, it was a little easier. Otherwise, I did what I always do at the beginning of a trip. I started a new pair of socks. This is a pair for me. Normally I knit socks for myself using a 4-ply sock yarn, a thinner sock yarn. And this is a 6-ply, which means my stitch counts were different. And that also meant I would need to knit the heels to, differently and the toes a little differently than I would with 4-ply because the gauge is different. I have fit issues in my heels. And so I use calculators on my computer that help me figure out how many extra stitches I might need. But at this point, I've memorized those for 4-ply sock yarn, but this is 6-ply. So I stuck with the good old standards of a heel flap and gusset. I know how long I need to make the heel flap, and I know how to knit a toe exactly in order to make it fit me. And I could confirm things with my ruler, but I didn't have access to my calculators. These I started on our trip to the Netherlands on the airplane and worked on it on the trains on our day trips. And then we got back toward the end of October, and then a few days later I left on another trip to Florida to see my old college buddies. There's 7 of us. We hadn't all been together for more than 35 years. Seen some of them here and there. But I was finishing these socks up on that weekend, and everybody was fascinated with self-striping yarn and the whole process of knitting socks. And so as I was finishing it up, I said, well, if anybody wants, I'm happy to knit socks, because I always like to knit socks, but I can't always just knit them for me because I don't need that many socks. Eventually, it turned out all of them except one wanted socks, and one of them decided on a pair of gloves. Since I've been back from that trip, I have started knitting socks. So what I do is I trace their foot, and then I ask them how long up on their leg, like from the floor, do they want their socks to hit. I measure their ankle, I measure their ball of foot, and I measure the heel diagonal so I can see if they're going to have fit issues. And then I can just measure how long to actually knit the foot from the tracing. But it also allows me to see how their toes are shaped so that I can kind of customize what toe that I'm going to knit for them. It's always a little bit of a guessing game when you knit the first pair of socks, because I think I've adjusted the heel and toe correctly for this person, but sometimes people like things to fit a little bit differently than it fits. Like they might like things a little looser in the leg or firmer around the foot. But you can get a lot closer when you have all of these measurements and you knit toward that. As I've been knitting them, I've been asking them to send me photos, and so I can see how they fit. I've done fairly well. Well, first pair of socks I knit were from my friend Pat, and that was tricky. I had to use contrast for the heels and toes because the yarn was in order to make them match, and based on the amount of yarn that was in the skein, I needed to use contrast heels and toes. I did think they would fit a little bit loose on one edge of his toe. Not completely thrilled with that. Otherwise, they fit him pretty well. My friend Brian, he has some interesting shaped toes, and so I really had to adjust how I knit the toe box for his socks, but they seem to fit him really well. And he has larger ankles and ball of foot, so commercial socks tend to be really tight on him. So he really liked that he could just pull these socks on. And then I knit a pair of socks for my old roommate, Linda. And I realized when I got the socks done and I was starting the next pair that I had a size 1 needle. I thought I had been knitting with a size 2 or a size 0, a 2mm needle. It's a size 0. And I couldn't find that needle anywhere. And I realized I must have knit Linda's socks with a size 1, which is a 2.25mm. I was really worried about that. I sent her the socks and I said, they probably are wearable, but let me know how they fit. She sent me pictures. She said, yeah, they're a little loose around the ankles and the heel, which is what I would have suspected based on what I had done. So that was a little disappointing, but she'll get another pair of socks in the future. I knit one more top-down hat without a pattern to use for the Technique Tuesday video where I was demonstrating. I had to do it over a couple of days so that I could film it. And this one's got a little ear flap. I've been experimenting with adding ear flaps, but they didn't have that in the video. And then there's this little pixie hat that I knit last week for someone I work with at the farm where I volunteer as a fiber assistant. She's having her first grandchild sometime early in the year, so I knit the baby a little hat. Finally, this hat right here is, I'm calling it the stocking hat. This is when I tried out a new method of tensioning the yarn for stranded colorwork so they could have both in the left hand, but have them be separate from each other. I tried a lot of things over the years, could never get that to work, but this method worked really well for me. I was able to keep pretty even tension, and I was really, really happy with that. And this hat is so cozy and soft and warm. It's a super fine merino, so very, very soft. That's everything that I finished this year. I have two things that are not finished. One is the pair of socks that I just started last week or so, where I've got one sock done, probably can get the other one done. And the other one is a project that I started a year ago in October, and it's part of this project for evolution of socks and stockings. It's in Tarsha, which I don't mind at all. It's in hibernation because there are a few choices I made for how to knit it and the tools I'm using that really frustrate me. So I think I can change the tool that I'm using, which will make me happier. And the second sock, I will not make the same construction mistake that I made. But you'll see more of that probably in February for Finish It. That's one of my Finish It February projects that I have planned. I have two other projects that will be fixed. They're 20 and 30-year-old Aran sweaters that I love and still wear, and the cuffs are fraying, and I need to fix those. So that's it. That's my 2025 knitting adventure. And while there are a few things that I knit, usually socks, where I didn't have to learn anything because I was knitting them for myself or I was just following a pattern that didn't have anything new in it for me to learn, most of the projects were me either designing or figuring out, learning a new construction method, making decisions about things, all kinds of things where I had to learn something new in order to make the project. And that's always the thing that I get the most pleasure out of with knitting. This will be my 40th anniversary of learning to knit in January. And the thing that has kept me knitting all of these years is realizing that while I know an awful lot about knitting, I don't know everything. I still have an opportunity to learn something new with just about every project. So I'd love to hear what you were able to do in 2025 with your knitting, and particularly what you learned this year with your knitting, and whether that is something that you plan for your new projects, if you choose things based on that opportunity to learn something new, or if you prefer just mindless projects so that you can pay attention to other things and just keep your hands busy. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday podcast and for season 8 of the Casual Friday podcast. I will see you next year for season 9. Thanks for watching.